My name is David Monk. I'm a member of the Eugene Wildfire Preparedness Coalition. The WPC was started by a group of neighborhood leaders back after the Labor Day fires last year, September. We started this coalition to educate and engage our community in wildfire preparedness. We're working with a number of state and local agencies and government agencies and jurisdictions around the state. As part of our education, we organized a fire forum late last year in October, featuring Eugene Springfield Fire Chief Heppel, Deputy Chief Linder, and Tim Inglesby with Firefighters United for, let's see, Mike, help me, Firefighters United for Safety, Ethics, and Environment.
And Ecology.
And Ecology, thank you. My apologies on that. Our next forum is scheduled for February 24th. We'll be sure to send out an invitation to all of you. This forum on the 24th will feature Amanda Rao with Oregon State University's Extension Service and Katie Gibble with the City of Ashland's Fire Department. You can look at our Facebook page, Eugene Wildfire Preparedness Coalition, for all the specifics on that presentation. Tonight's presentation is from Tom Peck and Mike Beasley. If you want to ask questions, please use the Q&A panel. I'll be reviewing those with our colleague Dana Ferguson, and we will get as many of your questions asked as possible. We are recording the presentations and we'll make that available to you. Let's see, you can ask your questions anytime they come up. We're going to wait until the end to actually present them to our panelists, okay? So without further ado, well, let me just start out by briefly introducing our two panelists. Tom Peck operated a school in California, training EMTs and paramedics for over 30 years. He retired and worked for a year with the Fire Safe Council in the Sierra Mountains, assisting with fire fuel reduction programs, assisting elderly, disabled, and low-income residents, as well as working on evacuation planning and simulation drills. He is now the chair of the Eugene Wildfire Preparedness Coalition. Mike Beasley is a retired wildland firefighter with 30 years of experience working in California, and he can give you some more information about his background. Gentlemen, take it away.
Mike, would you like to say a little bit about yourself before we start?
Well, sure. Thanks to Dave and Tom for letting me join you here with the Wildfire Preparedness Coalition today. I was born in Arkansas, but spent most of my career in California. Like I said, I just bought a place in South Eugene, but I have a Arkansas driver's license, plates, and I just prefer to tell everybody I'm from Arkansas. You know, I don't want to deal with that stigma. I spent the first 2/3 of my career conducting prescribed burns and mechanical fuel reduction around private homes and infrastructure for the National Park Service, including 8 years at Yosemite. And then the last third of my career was with the U.S. Forest Service in fire suppression leadership at the district and finally the forest level, where I was directing, an organization including crews, engines, helicopters, and the occasional air tanker. So since retirement, I continue to help out with big fires in the West, mostly on California incident management teams working in fire behavior and strategic planning. So I really look forward to this evening and going through this with Tom.
Thank you, Mike. I just want to say this presentation was it was designed for neighborhood residents. This last year was a pretty unprecedented fire season. There's a lot of lessons to be learned out of this last year. And so that's what this presentation is about. There's a lot of discussion about fire and wildfire. So stay tuned and take a look. And we're really interested in your feedback. This is really our first presentation of this PowerPoint. So welcome your feedback. So let's get started, Mike. So in 2020, we watched 10 million acres burn in the Northwest in California, causing $20 billion in damages. taxing the resources of local and state fire departments. That is twice the number of acres burned as in 2019. Oregon and California had the worst wildfire season on record. Mike, you want to say anything to add to that?
Well, just to build on that, just in California alone, over the past 20 years, California's had 9 of their 10 costliest wildfires and 9 of their 10 most destructive wildfires, all in that past 20 years. The one outlier being the Oakland Hills fire in 1991, that was just kind of a precursor or an opening act to our climate charged fires of today. And all of the top 10 largest fires, have been in the last 20 years, with 7 of the 10 largest in California just in the past 4 years. So that just tells you something about the trend line.
Okay. Oregon's unprecedented 2020 wildfire season burned over 1.2 million acres, destroying 4,000 homes and businesses and forcing the evacuation of 40,000 people, and it killed 11 people. Any thoughts, Mike?
Well, we'll talk more about the east winds, but you can start to see that pattern here in the fire shapes in Oregon. A lot of them were aligned in canyons that were aligned east to west. So they really picked up those east winds.
Okay, the Holiday Farm fire, which burned 170,000 acres, started on September 7th in Blue River. Strong easterly winds quickly turned it into a large wildfire storm, which traveled 22 miles in 13 hours down the McKenzie Valley past Vida. Had the high winds continued, the firestorm could have burned Springfield, only 14 miles away. This brown area is the Holiday Farm fire. The blue area are the fires that occurred between 2003 and 19. All of the fires combined between that period of 03 to 19 burned fewer acres than the Holiday Farm fire. Any thoughts, Mike?
No, I don't really have anything on this one.
Okay. The orange and red areas are the high fire hazard areas encircling Eugene and Springfield. The South Hills, where's my pointer? The South Hills and the Thurston Hills are particularly vulnerable to wildfire, as well as the grasslands on the northwest side of Eugene. If wildfire were to start in any of these hazardous areas, the entire community could be at risk. Mike?
Yeah, this is pretty much your classic, what's called the wildland urban interface. That's the point at which undeveloped fuels, vegetation, wildland vegetation meets or commingles with development, oftentimes homes or neighborhoods. And that's pretty much the definition of the WUI. And some of the most critical areas where that commingling occurs, in the South Hills would be, for instance, a place where you had a county park right up abutting to a neighborhood, and you've got those wildland fuels just immediately adjacent to homes and structures and whatnot.
Okay. This is Oregon on September of 2020, showing fires that burned on the west side of the Cascade Mountains. Had the easterly winds continued, major metropolitan communities like Portland, Salem, Eugene, and Roseburg could have burned. Any thoughts, Mike?
Well, it's just clear from this slide that you had a tremendous impact with particulate matter in a lot of Oregon's biggest population centers, which is a health risk that was compounded this year with COVID.
Right. Okay, it's useful to understand the katabatic winds, otherwise known as the easterly, Fohn, Chinook, or Santa Anas. They occur when cold, dense air passes over a mountain, increasing in temperature, causing the air to expand, becoming turbulent, and increasing in velocity. I know you have something to say about this, Mike.
Well, this is, the Diablo Wind, the Santa Ana winds. They're known by many names, coming from a lot of different mountain ranges, but it's all this same process of a rapidly accelerating downslope wind, and a lot of times that comes from dry continental air mass that's had a lot of sun baking it for a long time. In this case, there was a weird late August push of polar air down into Colorado. They even had snow in Colorado, and that displaced all this warm continental air eastward, or rather westward, across the Wasatch Range and the Cascades and the Sierras and the Coast Range. So there were these fern winds that picked up and took ongoing fires. A lot of them caused the power lines to pop off of their moorings and create fires, just from the high winds alone. But that was what was really happening on that one fateful day this last year, where fires from Utah to Washington State, all the devastation in Oregon, and all the way down into California, all occurred in a 1 or 2 day time period.
Thanks. So wildfire storms driven by strong easterly winds increase the amount of oxygen supplied to the fire. They push the flames towards the unburned fuel and blow hot embers, or otherwise known as firebrands, up into the air far ahead of the main fire. This can ignite multiple fires ahead of the main fire, rapidly increasing the spread of the wildfire. Any thoughts?
That's why the home ignition zone, just that area 100 feet around your house, from all that groundbreaking work that's been done at the Missoula Fire Lab, especially 5 feet from your home, having nothing flammable and nothing organic in that first 5 feet is so critical. And then in that space on out from your home, things like, the vents under the eaves of the openings in your attic. And we'll talk more about that, but these firebrands can be cast anywhere from a mile or 5 miles ahead of the active flaming front when you have these really high winds. So that's what really causes these fires to grow rapidly, growing 10 and 20 miles in a single day.
I believe this is your slide, sir.
And this is an example now of when you get a fire in an urban area, you can actually get an urban conflagration when all that man-made material starts to burn. And if the structures are too close together, just like in a timber stand, if the trees are close together, it represents a threat. And those are tremendous high speeds. This was clocked at 140 some odd miles an hour, same as an F-class tornado. So in the past, generally fires might just burn 1 or 2 blocks into an urban environment, but then run out of fuel. But now when we have these higher temperatures and the right combination of tightly spaced buildings and vegetation, we can get these kinds of large fire tornadoes developing over developed areas.
Thank you. All. So homes are built primarily of wood and petroleum products, which are extremely flammable. Most roofs are made of composition shingles that can resist fire for only an hour or less. So this house on fire, a house can generate extreme heat up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're going to talk about how this house can ignite your next door neighbor's house. But any thoughts on this, Mike?
Well, we'll talk about it in the next slide. Some work that was done after the 2018 fire. There was
There it is.
a study that looked at homes that were built after a California code change in 2008 that required interior sprinklers and reduced the openings in the vent mesh for that crawl space, and mandated fire resistant roofs and sidings and decks and patios. So, and the double paned windows. So over half the homes built after these codes were put in place survived in the Camp Fire in 2018, while only 18% of those built prior to 2008, burned. So, it was a significant difference for the fires, for the houses that had burned after those code changes.
So this is the Shady fire in Santa Rosa, California, last year, 2020, which burned entire neighborhoods. This fire progressed so quickly that firefighters had no time to fight fire, but only enough time to warn residents to evacuate. And this happens in quite a few fires recently. Fires can sweep through and burn urban residential homes just as they can in forests. So that's an important point that we need to remember. Mike, any thoughts?
Nope, nothing here.
Okay. The Alameda Fire started in Ashland as a small grass fire, which quickly spread and destroyed 2,800 homes and businesses in Talent and Phoenix. This is the aftermath of Talent and Phoenix. Homes lacking defensible space surrounded with trees, shrubs, and other flammable material increase the likelihood of fire ignition. Any thoughts, Mike?
Well, maybe in the Q&A we can talk more about defensible space and some of those specifications for, vegetation spacing after you get away from that first 5 feet where you should have absolutely nothing. But as you go out towards the wildlands, you need to have your individual or your groups of trees, spaced quite widely, until you get quite a distance away from your home.
Great, thanks. Okay, want to talk about one of the main driving forces here, which is climate change. So in our atmosphere, on the far left-hand top corner is a graph showing the trajectory of our CO2 concentration in our atmosphere. Burning fossil fuel produces 40 billion tons of CO2 annually. The Earth's atmosphere CO2 concentration has increased by about 2 parts per million annually. So like in 1960, the Earth's atmospheric CO2 concentration was 315 parts per million. Today, it's at 414 parts per million. So all of you know that CO2 is the main gas that keeps the planet warm. And too much CO2 will keep the planet too warm. And that's exactly what we're doing. In terms of the graph on the top right, the hottest 10 years on record took place in the past 11 years, hottest on record. NASA stated that 2020 was the hottest year on record. And they're trying to figure out if 2016 was really the hottest year, but they're neck and neck in terms of, anyways, the rainfall in Oregon, the Oregon precipitation continues to decline. We do have heavy precipitation in the winter, and we're having longer, drier summers, which that creates more fuel for the hot, dry summers. Our forests are stressed with heat and lack of rain, causing bark beetles and other pests to proliferate. and killing trees, making them more vulnerable to wildfire. Any thoughts, Mike?
Just on the next slide, I think.
Okay, so the 5th Oregon Climate Assessment Report came out recently. This is a summary of it. I'm not going to read it to you, but they are predicting hotter climates, hotter weather in all 4 seasons. We've increased in Oregon, our temperature by over 2 degrees, but they are projecting a 5-degree increase by 2050. That is frightening. And an 8.2 degrees increase by 2080. And this is put together by many climate scientists. So this is unrefutable documentation, and it's something that we really need to pay attention to about the amount of CO2 that we are producing. One of the last points is Oregon wildfires will continue to increase in frequency and intensity in the coming 50 years. So folks, we need to get prepared. Mike?
Well, yeah, we know that the climate has a couple of influences of the climate change we're seeing. We're seeing bigger destructive fires even in places where we haven't seen fire before, like Siberia and Amazonia, which is mostly from clearing, and Appalachia, and just odd places that haven't generally burned that much. And then, of course, those places that have oftentimes burned in the past, especially Mediterranean climates, now we're seeing, frequency and extent, and sometimes even severity are increasing, but because of these longer, hotter, drier summers. So, it's a thing of fuel aridity. Those hot temperatures bring with them really dry air. So fuels can get drier than they've ever been in the past.
Thanks. So this is an important graph. Prior to the 20th century, wildfires burned pretty much uncontrolled. But in 1910, there was a huge fire called the Great Fire in Idaho and Montana. It burned over 3 million acres, killed 87 people, mostly firefighters, and destroyed several towns. After that, the U.S. Congress doubled the budget of the newly formed U.S. Forest Service, which began decades of intense fire suppression. So you can see a real decrease in the amount of fires in the middle of this graph from like 1940 to 1980 or 85. So during that period of 1940 to 1980, the Western states experienced heavy precipitation, which aided in the suppression of wildfires. Today, our forests are left with an excessive amount of fire fuel. Less precipitation, hotter weather, and stronger winds, firefighters fighting large wildfires are becoming much more difficult to manage. Any thoughts, Mike?
Well, at the extreme left-hand side of the graph, you can imagine back when we did have free burning fires, and fire is important to a lot of ecosystems like dry pine, oak, woodland, certain grasslands all need that fire. But what we had were the biggest mass casualty events where civilians were killed. The top 3 of 10 were all around the turn of the century. The Prestego fire killed 1,200, 1,800 people. It was a huge catastrophe, and other fires back then in the Great Lakes states. And then the big blow up that you mentioned in 1910, those had a lot of casualties. The big blow up had 85, and we didn't see that number of civilian fatalities until here just a couple of years ago in 2018, the Camp Fire, 87 folks were killed. And we've seen over half of the 10 deadliest fires in U.S. history now have happened in the last 20 years. And also half of the 10 deadliest have occurred in California. But back in the old days, a lot of that was caused by logging slash that wasn't dealt with and wasn't treated. And then we had a big decrease after the war. They brought to bear a lot of the mechanized equipment, bulldozers, aircraft. The CCC era built a lot of lookouts and infrastructure and roads. So there were a lot of people out in the woods in that wet, cool period. That's why you see that decline. But now, despite our best efforts with modernized, mechanized, high-tech fire suppression, you're seeing that we're losing the ability to control these larger, more severe fires.
Okay. So this is about preparation. It is far more cost effective than trying to recover. So as you can see, there's just a few examples. The Tubbs fire, it burned 5,600 homes, cost, let me see here, it cost $2.2 billion. The Camp Fire in Paradise, 18,800 homes burned, $16 billion. The Carr Fire, which we saw a film of, $1.6 billion. And the Alameda Fire in Talent and Phoenix has cost $1 billion to date, but it's going to increase considerably from that. So any additions?
Well, yeah, we just know firefighting is costing more and more. I remember in the middle part of my career when we had our first $1 billion suppression year, and they talked about the cost of fighting fires equal to a cost of a B-1 bomber. But just in the 2017, 2018, and now 2020, we were, aside from those years, we were knocking back a loss of $1 billion there, $2-3 billion there. But those last 3 years I just mentioned, we've gone to a whole new order of magnitude for cost and losses on wildfires exceeding 10 billion, up to 20, even $30 billion. So, tremendous amount of loss in the last few years with these wildfires.
Great. So just in summary, I don't want to read this, but wildfires are a real major threat to our communities. I hope our neighborhood associations understand this and adopt some fire and join, the fire suppression and the fire mitigation movement. Second point is wildfires are not limited to forests, as we used to think. Urban residential neighborhoods can also burn, and homes are extremely flammable. Poor defensible space increases the likelihood. Climate change due to human activity is a major contributor, and preparation costs a whole lot more than is much cheaper than recovery. So let's see. So we have some initial solutions. I can tell you our coalition is part of the OFD funding that's coming. We're crossing our fingers that we will get funded, but the neighborhood associations, I would recommend a request that local and state officials to prioritize fuel reduction funding for all communities, not just the South Hills or not just Thurston Hills, but even the flatlands, because they need help too. Expansion of the Lane County Firewise program to include urban communities. House hardening, which means fire prevention roofs and siding on your house and other measures. There needs to be funding to help residents in all communities. Control burns, they're sometimes known as control ecological burns, needs to be really looked at because it's a way of reducing the fuel in some of the worst areas. Evacuation planning and simulation drills need to happen. We need to know how to evacuate and when to evacuate and where to evacuate to. And one of our members in the coalition is got a lot of experience with mapping, and we're producing, we're going to be working with the fire department to help produce evacuation routes depending on where the fire is coming from. And then lastly, emergency alert systems for evacuation are a real high priority. Any thoughts on this, Mike?
No, this is a great starting point.
Okay. So this is some of the things that the coalition is involved in. We see ourselves seriously as coalition builders. We want to work with state and local government agencies, nonprofits, and of course, neighborhood associations to engage in wildfire mitigation. We are going to perform a lot of community outreach through social media. Again, we're developing mapping for hazardous fuel areas, working with OFD, and evacuation routes. So we're engaged, and we're just completed 3 grant proposals, and we're seeing the outcome of that. So at the bottom of your screen is our new email address. It's eug.fire.prep.coalition@gmail.com. So if you want to get a hold of us, please send us a line. You should know that we are a all volunteer organization. So if we don't get back to you immediately, know that we will. If you want to get involved and help out, please come on board, because there's a lot of work to be done. So at this time, I think I'll turn it back over to David Monk, and I think we'll begin our question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Tom. Mike, really appreciate it. That was informative and, might I say, a little frightening. So I don't know how others feel, but it's a daunting new normal that we find ourselves. Tom, I'm hoping you could take us back to this slide. There was a question about the building code changes done in California that Mike spoke to. And Mike, I was hoping you might reiterate what you said and talk about the value to minimizing home fires for those building codes, because as some of us know, last full session, the governor had proposed some building code changes for the state of Oregon, and those were dropped from the bill that actually never made it to the House for a vote because of the walkout. But we're hoping that some of those come back in a piece of legislation in this session, and I think the California experience would be very informative for our legislators. So if you'd go over that again, please.
Yeah, and I might have stumbled over these stats, and it's also kind of an interesting point. There was just a movie in the Sundance Film Festival about all this, and even in Paradise, California, that had just been destroyed, they were unable to initiate these zoning requirements. To just show you the kind of resistance sometimes you get from, or not zoning, but these kinds of building code requirements. They tried to do it at a local level, and the folks even that had just been through devastation still voted it down because they felt it was too restrictive. But anyway, of all the fires that burned in the Camp Fire in 2018, and I'm pretty sure that was over 10,000 homes, 51% that were built after this code were undamaged, while only 18% of those were undamaged. And I think I actually got this slide wrong. And it's instead of only 18% of those built prior to 2008 were undamaged. And I think that I typed on this PowerPoint, and I didn't catch it. But essentially, over half the homes built after the code survived, while only 20% of those, or less than 20% of those built prior to that survived. The older structures were more susceptible. So I'm not really familiar with the state legislation. I'm just getting my feet on the ground with state legislation. We're following some things here and there, but it is hard. People see this as a major infringement on their rights, basically, as a property and homeowners, to be forced to do these things. But the mesh, I think the size on the vent openings is interesting, as that's really been identified as a primary way where those firebrands can make it into a house and ignite the home. That and right around the base of the house where you might have something or burning, right at the edge of your flammable house siding.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, then those are two very low cost things that every renter homeowner can do. I mean, this fine screen is very inexpensive. Installing it a little bit more complicated. So thanks for that clarification, because one of our questioners was a little confused by that because of the typo you had. And so thank you again for explaining that. I've got a couple of questions about defensible space in an urban setting. Some of us are using the home ignition zone as the way to describe that in an urban setting, because a defensible space in a rural setting is 100 feet away from the building. We can't do that in urban setting. So if you guys would give us some sense of how an urban resident, wanting to be mindful of the aesthetics of their yard, of maintaining as much vegetation as possible to pull carbon out of the air and minimize their carbon footprint. What's the appropriate way for residents to think about the kind of defensible space, or defensible space they're trying to create on their properties when their nearby neighbor only is 10 feet away? And maybe you can speak to both these issues. That's a huge concern for a lot of folks who understand that if your neighbor's house catches on fire because of their mismanagement, perhaps of their property or not, that's probably the biggest danger to your home, is the proximity to that other home. So what's number one, what can neighbors, residents do to lessen, to minimize the dangers from their property? And then how would you recommend people work with their neighbors who are somewhat reluctant to take this on, and so that everyone is safer in that part of their neighborhood?
You want me to stay a little bit, Mike?
Yeah,
there are very inexpensive things that you can do, which include keeping your roof free of pine needles and leaves, keeping the gutters around your rain gutters clear of leaves, because in the summer, when if there was a firestorm, that's a place where fire ignition can start. But also, like Mike said, covering the vents to your attic with fine mesh will keep the firebrands out. There is a paint that when it meets heat, bubbles up and blocks the entrance of firebrands, so you can buy that. So those are really inexpensive things. But you see branches that are very close to your roof. Those unfortunately need to go, because those are ladders right to your house. Fences also are major sources of house fires in this type of wildfire situation, where your fence is this open place where it can catch firebrands, ignite, and burn on up to your house. So they're recommending non-flammable fencing close to your house. So those are inexpensive, but there are shingles that you can buy that are A-rated shingles. They're either ceramic or fiberglass or steel, which are very fire resistant, of course. And then the siding is much more, it's also a fairly expensive endeavor, covering your house with like hardy board type siding that does not ignite, and that makes your house much more fire resistant. In terms of your neighbors, I recommend they look at this PowerPoint, and it'll be online on YouTube. But people are somewhat slow to change, but they need to understand that we're all in this together. And if one person doesn't reduce their fire fuel, they really do endanger the whole neighborhood. So, Mike, you have thoughts?
Can you let me share something on my screen? I don't know if that's possible, but if you'll let me, I have a little quick graphic. I did see somebody out in the crowd asking about metal roofs, and metal roofs are indeed quite a bit safer than composite shingles. They're also
I think you can share. Let me close mine and go ahead and share it.
okay. Uh, the composite shingles are more flammable for sure than metal. Metal is required in some places, but and it's much longer lived. It does, I think, cost 2 or 3 times more than composite shingle, but it's worth it for fire protection for sure.
You
And
want to talk more about the slide?
yeah, it shows the 5-foot zone. You can imagine this as your typical residential lot. I mean, if you really are just 10 feet away from your neighbor's home, you don't want any vegetation in that gap at all. You're already, potentially too tight for, firebrands and flames potentially being difficult to keep, under high winds from jumping from structure to structure. And it talks a little bit about pruning. All your flammable vegetation, especially, should get pruned up 6 to 10 feet. And, if it's out there in your yard, maybe you got a group or some individual pieces of vegetation, trees, but if they're flammable, they need to have that 18-foot crown spacing all through that 30-foot zone. Pretty much covers a whole lot in a small lot in town. So, but then if you've got like the issue often becomes all that, if you abut next to a fully undeveloped lot, that's a whole nother world, really. Then you've got all that wildland vegetation in that undeveloped lot that you have to contend with. And, really, if you want to have a visual barrier, and I can see the desire for that, but if it's so tight you can't see through it, and it's the least bit flammable, say for instance like Himalayan blackberry, there's a lot of that around here. It may act as a visual screen, but it can burn in the event of a wildfire.
Thank you, guys. Okay, I've got a couple of questions. One about conservation areas that are developed oftentimes with developments, where there's a steep hillside and it doesn't lend itself to building any homes on. Who has responsibility for that? And then along those same lines, I know I've talked to this neighbor. She's in my southeast neighborhood, and she's adjacent to a homeowners association. And she's tried to work with the homeowners association with their officers, even offering to pay the expenses for removing a dead tree and all the down branches around it. And yet she's getting no traction with them. So can you kind of speak to, again, that's an individual trying to work with a homeowners association. What might you suggest in terms of, getting some leverage with those folks? And then secondly, to the degree that who's responsible for conservation areas and open space that are part of a private land development?
Yeah, I don't know if I am equipped to answer that one. That one's pretty technical. I don't know if you've got any ideas, Tom, but I would think that the homeowners association would be the outfit in charge of taking care of the vegetation there. I mean, I think that there's no one else doing it. Clearly, they're the ones managing the vegetation on that lot. So, I don't know what legal recourse you have,
I think the legal recourse is very little. I think, people's consciousness need to expand. And I think as the wildfire seasons continue, people will wake up. But right now, people think I prefer my beautiful trees to the risk of wildfire. But I can tell you people in California are wide awake because they've just seen too many fires. So that's, and our job of the coalition is to bring that consciousness to neighborhood associations and HOAs and individuals in our community.
One of the complaints I hear about a lot, in the isolated, more mountainous, communities, maybe some that are near parks and whatnot, they have undeveloped lots. They want some local code about, absentee landowners with undeveloped lots, and it's very difficult to get a county to adopt that kind of code.
Thank you.
So it really, the local collaboration through fire safe councils and firewise communities, and what you're doing with this coalition is the way to overcome that, I think.
Thank you, Mike. Hey, now this question is not really pertinent to our coalition and the partners we're working with, but it's a huge issue for us, and that's when you look at, say, the Holiday Farm fire. A huge amount of that, and probably some of the most intense fire, happened in replanted tree farms. And the questioner asked if we're working with private timberland owners in some way to encourage them to change their practices. I'm curious, Mike, what kind of actions would you, as an experienced wildland firefighter, recommend to private landowners, in this case, tree plantation owners? What should they be doing to minimize the fire danger from their tree plantations? I mean, clearly the fires that endangers the residents living in communities nearby, and we had the chance was fairly significant that the Holiday Farm fire could have blown into the metro area, and I think in large part because of the amount of tree plantations that were burning to the east of us. So what actions should they be taking towards this?
Well, that's a tough one, because they're going to say that, especially in the age of climate, that they can sequester a lot of carbon with all those young trees. But the fact remains that ground stays more flammable for 40 or 50 years before that plantation looks different from a California shrub field, before the individual trees start to get thinned out. And that takes a lot of thinning over the years, which of course private timberland is going to do that at some level, because they want to eventually harvest the large trees. But that's all they care about, are the large trees that don't really contribute so much to fire behavior, while it's the small unmerchantable material and those plantations that are the most flammable. But that's a business model. That's how they see their business as renewable.
I can also add that PG&E in California has had, I don't know the number, but millions of dollars of lawsuits for causing fire. And a couple of years ago, they were talking about Chapter 7 bankruptcy because of all the suits. So I don't know, the wildfire seasons are just beginning, but really public pressure is the only way to resolve this, I believe.
Yeah, climate has given us, hotter and windier conditions, and one of the windier conditions are definitely playing havoc with the power lines. I mean, in a future development, if they can afford it, I think they are going to start trying to put power infrastructure underground. But I think that's pretty cost prohibitive in a lot of cases.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks, Tom. How about this? One of our questioners wanted to know about the urban canopy. We have, certainly in the South Hills, we have quite dense 100 years, in some case 60 to 100-year-old Douglas firs trees. This questioner is wondering what should be done with these denser Douglas fir, whatever you want to call them. I mean, in our yards, is that something that is dangerous to those nearby residents? And are there certain trees that tree species that are more dangerous, more flammable, and others less so?
Well, for sure, like the I know it's not a very technical term, but the more fluffy timber litter that you get with a long needled pine like ponderosa pine, that moves out quite a bit more quickly than your short needle pine. And in fact, a lot of people before last year would have thought that, the forests around Eugene were fairly fireproof because it is a much wetter climate than California. And you do have that more compact, short needled cast and litter that accumulates. So that burns a little bit more slowly, but you still don't want to have that litter right up against the edge of your house, because oftentimes there's no one there. If there's not someone, either a homeowner or someone with the fire department there, then, just a slow moving fire inching through the litter has often, caught the corner of a fire on home, and the whole fire or the whole home gets involved just from a little stringer of litter that led from the main fire to the edge of the house or to the deck.
Got it. Thank you, Mike. Hey, Tom, we've got a question about, you had mentioned sprinkler systems and perhaps they were being mandated in interior sprinkler systems in California. Could you speak to, in terms of hardening your house to fire? And we talked about the danger of our houses being so close together in terms of fire. Could you talk about an exterior sprinkler system, how that might be set up? And do you think that would be beneficial?
Sure, thanks. Yes, if you want to find out more about that, just Google external fire suppression systems. The Australians have really perfected it. They have a whole variety of different types of sprinkler systems, from rainbirds to systems that put out a thick mist around the side of your house. What you need to remember is you need your own water supply, because you may lose pressure from municipal water supply, and you also need your own power. So you need, some people are using electric pumps with a large marine battery bank to power it for several hours. Or a gas pump that you protect from the heat of the fire and from any fire. But the point is, you need to keep your house wet, not just the roof, but the siding and the eaves. So there needs to be sprinklers underneath your eaves as well. No one has really in this country perfected that. There is foam that you can put on your house, that you can put systems that spray foam that protects your house. But it's a fact that a wet house, the chances of it igniting are extremely low, as opposed to a nice dry house. So but Google it, external fire suppression systems.
Tom, as a follow-up, are there any paints that are available on the market that are more fire resistant?
There is a paint that was recommended, and I've tried to find it and can't. I used to know the name of it, but what it does is it bubbles up when it's heated, and blocks like fire embers from entering your closet or your attic vents. So I don't know the name of it, but I would search the internet for that.
Yeah, we could probably find it that same resource. Thank you. So I've got a question about natural gas. Many of us in many of our neighborhoods have natural gas running underground, and it comes up at the side of the house. This questioner was concerned about, if we had a wildfire moving through a neighborhood, is it sufficient to just turn the gas off at the valve, or are there potential explosions possible from a fire burning a house and igniting the natural gas that's coming to it?
Well,
go ahead.
Well, I can tell you, I was in the Oakland Berkeley fire, and you could watch the fire meters explode and the house go up in flames right after that. So you definitely want to shut down and have a valve handy next to your meter to shut off the fire, the fuel in your house. But that's all I can say. Mike, you may have some other thoughts.
No, really. I mean, what I've seen mostly in more rural settings is the issue being the LP gas tanks, and they just usually vent and make a big loud noise, but they'll sometimes explode, those in the smaller propane tanks. And that's a big danger. But I think just turning off the gas inside your house is fine. Turning it off at a higher level, the gas company is going to be busy doing that in the event of a wildfire anyway, for sure.
So one of our participants put in the question, the name of that paint, and it is called Intumescent, INTUMESCENT, Intumescent paint.
Thank you very much.
Fire resistant, perhaps fire retardant paint. Okay, let's see, what else did I want to, we've got a lot of, oh yes. So someone had asked about what plantings would be appropriate near the house, fire resistant, what plantings obviously would be inappropriate to plant close to your house. And I know that the Oregon State Extension Service provides a really extensive array of information about that. One of our listeners, based on that prior question and answer, put in a link, and we'll share that with you because it's a really long link, so I won't try to read that out to you right now, but that'll be in the recording, and we will provide that to you all after the presentation, so that you'll know where there's a good resource for identifying good plants. Okay.
I just want to put in that you can contact Amanda Rao at Oregon State University Extension, and they are here to help our neighborhoods prepare for wildfire. So we will include links to their website and contact information.
One of our questionnaires, I guess we talked about earlier about difficulties with this neighbor having trouble with a nearby neighbor with an HOA, and this participant let us know that there is city code that requires that grass be cut below 12 inches and that dead trees be removed. And I know I've been talking to quite a few folks who are having these same kinds of issues, and the city is not as responsive as they would hope in kind of challenging and, no pun intended, lighting a fire under these adjoining neighbors to do the work that needs to be done. Can you guys suggest anything that the coalition might be should work on to perhaps encourage the city to add some enforcement requirements or some kind of teeth to this code language that they already have, which seemingly is not as effective as it should be?
Yeah, I think canvassing your law enforcement and the fire department to find out what it is, why they aren't doing more enforcement, is at least a good question to ask and a starting point, and figure out how you can get them the help they need. Your coalition could also at some point offer assessments to homeowners to help them get their lots in better shape, and go through a list of a bunch of different items and bullet points around their home, and possibly help them out that way. But it probably falls on the shoulders of ODF to do the enforcement. I'm not sure, but that's how it is in California.
This is going to be a process, and it's going to take years, but really the neighborhood associations have a tremendous amount of strength. If we organize ourselves and unite, we can help change the legislation to make it illegal for people to have untreated properties and endangering everybody else. So it's something that I'm hoping our neighborhood associations all pick up on this and continue it, take it forward.
Yeah, I noticed another person in the chat box was talking about too many homes along egress routes. And, I think that's really important. We talked about escape routes and evacuation routes, and you really want to have your fuel reduction done along those routes so you aren't having flame impingement on people's cars when they're trying to get out. We've seen in a lot of these increasing mass casualty events that that fuel along your escape route is really important, so that maybe also having places where people can shelter up along the way. But for sure, taking care of your fuels along that corridor, it's kind of sad. You think about something like the Amazon corridor. I mean, you're not really going to want to go in there and start butchering the vegetation. But if you ever had a fire, that would be a potential corridor that would carry the fire. I mean, so it's a delicate balance of in an urban setting of aesthetics and fire resistance.
Thank you. Hey, I just want to let one questioner know that he asked about the fire hazard map that I think you all displayed in the presentation we've been using. It's a 2014 map, and we're hoping that gets updated. This questioner was hoping for a higher resolution map so that they could really see in their part of the city what their fire hazard risk was. So just to let you know, we're working on that because it's a really valuable resource for us. It needs to have some more specificity on the sites that we're thinking about. The question I put to you guys, fire-wise communities in rural Oregon are provided with, I believe, some no interest loans, perhaps some grants to do defensible space. Can you guys talk about what's being done in rural Oregon to minimize fire danger? And can we, is it legitimate for us, because for us as urban residents, to ask for those same kind of funding opportunities and or programs, chipping days, the like? Is it fair of us to ask for that same kind of program in an urban setting?
Well, I can say a little bit, which is the governor has just earmarked $5 million for fuel mitigation in Oregon, and ODF is applying for a part of that grant, and we'll know next week if we get that grant. But most of it is fuel reduction, but that's just the beginning. We are told that more funding will be available, and so we're looking forward to. We've talked to quite a few of our state legislators about this problem, and there's some very good legislators that are drafting bills that will increase the amount of funding and resource to relate to wildfire mitigation. So that's coming, and certainly our support for those bills is important to let them know this needs to pass, and there are some people who are reluctant to pass these bills, but it really needs to come from all of us in the neighborhoods. So.
Thank you, Tom. So I got some more questions about vegetation management. One was about hedges. A lot of us covet our privacy in our yards, and we've cultivated laurel hedges, all kinds of perhaps non-native species to provide these hedges. What do y'all think about the danger those hedges, the danger from those hedges to our houses? And then secondly, there was a question about tall conifer trees, and there's a lot of misunderstanding amongst folks about what precisely creating defensible space means. And so in the context of these taller trees, can you talk about, I know there's some um, suggestions for the spacing that they might be, how far they might be cut up from the ground. So can you two gentlemen talk about hedges as a danger, and then again, the big Douglas fir trees, and are they harmful, dangerous, or are they helpful for minimizing fire?
I could take that one. The hedges, I think like a laurel is probably a fairly inflammable species. There are lists you can get onto to look at what's flammable and what's less flammable, versus say the blackberry, which can, when it's dried, become pretty flammable. And that is actually the case for a lot of vegetation, is if you get it dry enough, it will become flammable, but maybe only under the driest situations. But a lot of hedges, I wouldn't worry too much about them, but again, I wouldn't have them within that 5 feet. You wouldn't want them touching your house at all. And you wouldn't want any kind of organic, flammable, ground cover material around them, right up against the edge of the house either. As far as the big old mature trees, those things are doing a lot of good, sheltering you from wind. The wind speed is lower beneath the canopy. The ground is kept shaded and more moist. If you open up a canopy too much, you can actually dry out the fuels on the surface. So, I'd be more worried about a big tree that had a defect that might catch on fire and then fall over on my house. If it had like an old burn scar or something on the face of it that got to burning and no one saw it for a day, that could topple over and do some damage. But if the whole thing torches up, and it's fairly rare that could happen. If you don't want fuels underneath it, you want to make sure you limit up, as we saw in that earlier slide. That's important too. If that thing did torch, it would send embers a long way just because of the height.
Excellent, thank you. Tom, can you speak to what the coalition is trying to do in terms of, the questioner made a comment about, the building codes that California had implemented and how they were effective at minimizing the level of damage to homes. But the building code only affects newer homes. So what is the coalition trying to do for those homeowners, perhaps elders on fixed incomes, folks with an income that doesn't allow them to change their siding and change their roofing? Is there something that the coalition can do to help those residents harden their homes to wildfire?
Sure. Well, first I'd like to say the coalition is 4 months old, maybe 5, but we're pretty new. We're growing in support and activists, but we're in desperate need of more people to get involved. So if you think of the coalition as this outside agency, the coalition is as strong as you get involved, and we have the ability. But we have our sights on many things to do. We are reviving our website for the Neighborhood Leaders Council, which we are part of, and we want to use that as a resource for everybody. But we have David and I have been talking to legislators, around Oregon about these dangers, and so I think the sense of new legislation to support homeowners, to perhaps raise money to harden houses and protect from wildfire. It's a big expense, but we run the risk of losing a lot of houses. So really, I can only say, come join us. We are growing and building relationships with other agencies, and that takes people power, and we can only do as much as we have power to move forward. So
Thanks, Tom.
That's,
Yeah, well, I'll just follow up by saying that you had kind of referenced that we were partners in applying for funding in several places. We've submitted a proposal to the Oregon Community Foundation, and our focus is on low-income residents, elders, those without the means to harden their homes. First of all, to of course educate them about the dangers of wildfire to them. But hopefully there's a lot of foundation money that is trying to help underserved communities. So that's a major focus of the coalition, to try to access that funding where we can and pass it through to neighbors in need. We'll see if we're successful at that, but that's certainly one of our hopes. Tom, there were several questions about folks asking how they can get involved with the coalition. Would you repeat the email address that people can reach us at?
let me find it. Okay, it is EUG for Eugene. It's eug.fire.prep.coalition@gmail.com. So it's eug.fire.prep.coalition@gmail.com. And we should be finding out about the ODF grant around February 8th. We also have another grant, an HNRI matching grant with the city. We should find out about that soon. And I think we will be having another meeting. So send us your email address. You will be included on the next meeting that we hold probably in a week or two. And, that'll be a real good way to plug in and get on a committee. If you have expertise at grant writing or doing mapping, or there's just a number of jobs that need to happen to make this thing grow and get the strength that we need. So yeah, put your email. Thank you, Richard. Put your email in the chat, or send us your email and we will put you on the mailing list. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Tom talked about some of those work groups. We have a group that's been meeting with legislators. We've met with some of our city council members, with most of the Lane County delegation, Senator Golden from the Ashland Talent Phoenix area. So if you're interested in working on, there are several pieces of legislation in this session that would love your help to advocate for. And so that's another work group. Evacuation planning. We really want to work with Eugene Springfield Fire to provide relevant, usable information for residents to help them create their own personal and family evacuation plans. So that's something that we'll probably be doing a training in the future on. Let's see, we're getting down. We've covered a lot of the questions, and we've got about 10 minutes left here. There was a question about electric power lines. It seems that the Holiday Farm fire was a power line that was knocked down by the wind. This questioner asks about undergrounding power lines. Is that something that urban residents could advocate for in the context of fire mitigation?
Definitely. I mean, yeah, it's expensive to the power companies, I think.
I
And of
think
course,
new construction should be underground, but it's perhaps more expensive to maintain. I don't know, maybe not, but it's certainly a lot safer. And with the future and the cost of these fires, that's nothing compared to trying to rebuild a community that's burned.
I mean, PG&E was bankrupted, and they're a huge company. I shudder to think what's going to happen to the small electric co-op up Canyon.
yeah, I kind of spoke to that. Yeah, I'm going to close this out. Thank you. Let's see. I think we've got basically all the questions. I'm sure there's something I missed here, but we've pretty much got to them in one way or another. So I encourage those who perhaps I overlooked your question or I didn't ask it in the way that you had hoped I would. Perhaps you can send us an email with that question and we will send you a more definitive response, okay?
David, let me just inject that we are having a Wildfire 2 forum on February 24th at 6:30 p.m. Amanda Rao from Oregon State University Extension will be a keynote speaker, and her co-panelists will be Katie Gibble from Ashland Fire Department. She is the community liaison to the fire department and the community. We would love to have a person like her at Eugene Springfield Fire Department to help move things forward. So stay tuned. We will send out invites in the next couple days, and we will this time include the phone number to accommodate those of you who didn't have a computer. So we apologize for that mishap. But stay tuned for that. It should be very good, very informative. Those two women are a storehouse of information. Thank you.
Yeah, and of course, very usable information along the lines of what we were talking about in creating defensible space on your property, on your urban property. Katie is providing that that information to Ashland residents. So I think that will be a very informative webinar. So I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Really appreciate you all participating. Lots of great questions. Again, if we didn't answer them, please send us an email. We will get you a more definitive response. We would really appreciate your feedback. There's a survey that you could participate in terms of what future topics you would like to have us cover, questions that you might think about later tonight. So the poll has, it's pretty, let's see, there's 8 questions. Yeah, 8 questions on it. So we really appreciate you taking a look at that and giving us your feedback. And again, what other kinds of future forum topics you'd like. Let's see, other than that, Tom told you about our next fire forum. We will send you out an invite. And I'll say, Mike, Tom, any closing comments?
Come join us. We need your help. This is probably some of the most important work we need to do for our community. So we're looking forward to growing with you.
Yeah, I'd just say that's the only way this kind of work happens is through close community collaboration.
Thank you, guys. Hey, so we've got a Facebook page, Eugene Wildfire Preparedness Coalition. You could go there for the recording of this presentation tonight. The invite for the February 24th will be there. We'll, of course, send that out to everybody who participated tonight. We've got your email address, so we'll keep you updated. But that's a good resource for a lot of the information that the coalition is working on. Thank you all so much. Good night.
Thank you all for coming.
Yep, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.